Wednesday webinar. I'm Nancy McGee. I'm the Vice President of Education with the Commemorative Air Force, and we have another great program to bring you today. And these guys have a lot of information, so we're going to launch right into it. I do want to thank our audience for joining us, though, on Monday to get to see Carnegie Tomasian. That was a fantastic program. We've got another great one. So let me start off with some introductions. Today we have with us Dan Reagan, who's the current Gulf Coast Wing member and a 1954 Navy crewman of Texas Raiders. We have, of course, Buddy Cooksey, who's a current Texas Raider pilot and the longest tenured Gulf Coast Wing member, and of course, headquarters, all around ops good guy. And then lastly, but certainly not least, Kevin Michaels, who is a current flight crew member, and he's the wing historian, and he's put together an unbelievable program for us today. And I also want to thank Nancy Queachin, who's the executive officer of the Gulf Coast Wing. She has made all of this happen and worked a lot behind the scenes to bring all these people together. So thank you to all of you for the time you've spent putting together the program and the practices that we've had already. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you. And I think, Kevin, you are up first.
All right, we'll jump straight into this. So of all the World War II aircraft that were out there, one of the most iconic is certainly the B-17. It's one of the first few that you think about. And of the 12,731 that were built, there's just a few flying examples left. And we're very lucky to have Texas Raiders as one of those aircraft. Today we're going to tell you all about her incredible story, the legacy she represents, as well as the men and women that gave all in support of the freedoms that you and I take for granted every day. Next slide. Okay, Texas Raiders started life at the Douglas plant in Long Beach, California. You can see some pictures of that exact plant right here. These are Rosie the Riveters you see in the picture. On July 12th, 1945, on the very last day of production at that plant. Now, World War II aircraft that were built at that time pretty much went to the scrapyard. That was their goal, or that's where they went. But that's not what happened to Texas Raiders. And the reason for that is that 4 days after production, the Navy came along and said, we'll take 20 of those B-17 sitting on your tarmac. Why would they want a B-17? Well, they had the Cadillac II program going on, which was a development project for airborne early warning radar. This led to the very first successful AWACS program in the world, and Texas Raiders was a part of it. She was flown to Johnsville, Pennsylvania, where she awaited the particulars of the program to get sorted out and for the equipment to be available, and she was completed in a PB-1W configuration in May of 1947. And this is when she made her first transition from surplus and obsolete into state-of-the-art. Next slide. Dan, over to you.
This slide here is after the Texas Raiders the modification were finished at Johnsville, Pennsylvania. The aircraft was transferred to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, to a squadron, Navy Squadron VX4. This slide shows a log entry by Lieutenant Basiloni, who is a CIC radar operator aboard the aircraft. And we believe this may have been the very first operational flight for Texas Raiders in the fleet. Next slide, please. This is a picture of Texas Raiders as it was assigned to VX4. It's on the parking apron at Stuxnet River, Maryland at this time. The aircraft at this time were still in their aluminum configuration, and the tail code XD1 identified the aircraft as VX1 aircraft. At this time, they were flying many test flights, experimental flights, learning to do the missions that the Navy wanted to. The primary mission was airborne early warning. And along with that mission and the Cold War was particularly beginning at that time. VX-4 was flying along the coast of the east coast of the U.S. As an extension of the Pine Tree Line, which was across Canada and America, and they were flying to alert if Russian aircraft were incoming. Also, the aircraft missions included, secondary missions included hurricane hunting, sub patrol, and electronic countermeasures. Next slide, please. The squadron was doing an air show at Fort Pierce in 2014, and this fella came up and started talking to some of our crew members, and he was relating that when he was in the Navy in 1947-48, he flew B-17s, and he was flying for Squadron VX-4, and this is when he was advised Texas Raiders was in VX-4 back in those days. And he may well have flown as a flight engineer on Texas Raiders back in those days. Small world. These pictures here are some of the sister aircraft with the squadron. Quonset hut on the right there. You'll notice that the nose turret is still there. They didn't take these things off until 46 and 47, 48 on some of the aircraft. Even the armor was left on until around 1950. Next slide, please. When the aircraft went into overhaul in 1950, they came out being painted navy sea blue. This is a picture of Texas Raiders on the parking apron of VW1 at Barbers Point, Hawaii. You'll notice the 300-gallon P-38 wing tanks inboard of the outboard engines. These wing tanks carried 300 gallons of gas, and they were required for the aircraft to go from the continental United States to Hawaii. The aircraft went through many squadrons before it got to VW1. It went to overhaul in 1953 and came out of overhaul in January 54. In February of 54, this aircraft, Texas Raiders, was transferred and assigned to VW1. Next slide, please. This is my flight log of December 1954. On the 7th of December, early on when I joined the squadron, I was a crew member on Texas Raiders. And we took a flight called the Flower Flight from Barbers Point, Oahu, to the town of Hilo on the Big Island of Hawaii. And on the way, we flew over Kilauea volcano, which was erupting at that time. We flew almost right over the top of that aircraft. Next slide, please. Last year, our squadron had a reunion in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we visited wings over Dallas at that time. And George Stewart, a crew chief, and I had our pictures taken with Texas Raiders. It so happens that George Stewart was on the last crew chief on the last Navy crew that was aboard Texas Raiders when she left Barbers Point, Hawaii, and flew to the Boneyard in Arizona, where Texas Raiders was retired as a Navy aircraft. Back to you, Kevin.
Okay, so at that time, TR had 3,257 military hours on her, which was the 5th most of all the B-17s that were ever built. And that's all of them, not just the Navy ones, every one. Not bad for an aircraft that was going straight to the scrapyard. Next slide. Okay, so she sat in the boneyard for about 22 months, and then Aero Service Corporation, which is a division of Litton Industries, came along, and they were hunting for a couple of aircraft that they could use for some purposes they needed. And they found two B-17s in the in Litchfield Park that they liked, and they purchased them. One was their primary aircraft that happened to be Texas Raiders. The other one was going to be used for parts. They paid $17,500 for Texas Raiders, which at the time was a large dollar figure. We attribute that to the recent overhaul that TR had just prior to going into the boneyard, and that made her more valuable. Now that she was a civilian, she was given an FAA registration of N7227 Charlie. That sounds familiar. It's the same one she wears today. Aero then gutted her out and fitted her with all kinds of equipment that made her perfect for their purposes, which included aerial surveying, an aerial photographic platform, high altitude mapping, and satellite tracking. And she traveled all over several continents doing all kinds of work that still exists today. So for the second time, she was turned in from surplus and obsolete into state-of-the-art. On the right-hand side of there, you will see an interesting historical photo. And what this is a general's retirement. In 1965, General Curtis LeMay was going to be retired. And the organizers of that event wanted to have a B-17 to use as a backdrop. Well, there were no more B-17s in military service at that time, so they reached out to some of the civilian operators. And there were lots of B-17s in civilian hands at that time. And it just so happens that the B-17 they found and used, guess who's in the background there? That is Texas Raiders. Curtis LeMay would have a 20-year relationship with Texas Raiders, and he didn't even know it at this time. It's just really kismet. Next slide, please. Buddy, over to you.
All right. 1957, the CAF was chartered, and the whole idea behind the CAF was to acquire, maintain, and fly all the fighters that were used by the U.S. Army, Air Forces, and Navy during World War II. In 1963, the CAF did accomplish that goal and did have one of every kind of fighter that the U.S. had used and manufactured. They decided now to move forward and add bombers to the fleet. At this particular time, CAF headquarters was still located in Mercedes, Texas, on a rather small field. So just kind of put that in the back of the mind. In 1964, the CAF acquired a B-25 and an A-26. In 1967 is when they purchased both the B-17, what is now known as Texas Raiders, and the B-24, now known as Diamond Leo. Now, back to the fact that we were operating, or the CAF was operating off a small field. Those aircraft could not operate in and out of that airport, so they went to different airports. Texas Raiders was flown by Lefty Gardner and Gary Levitz to Brownwood, Texas, and that's where that airplane was based until we were able to get a new and better facility, which that happened in 1968 when the headquarters moved from Mercedes, Texas to the old Harlingen Air Force Base. Hence, they were able to bring the whole fleet together in one place. Now, the CAF at that time was called the Confederate Air Force, but the real leader of this thing was a fictitious character or mystical character called Jethro E. Culpepper. And all the members that flew were all colonels. Reason for that was no one would be sergeants, no one would be generals, would all be basically the same. And that worked out real well. But being it was called Confederate Air Force, now the next problem came in. Slide. Next slide. The next problem that showed up was, so you bought a B-17, what do you name her? Well, how do you even paint it? What do you do with all this? I mean, you've got something kind of neat going on. If you'll notice in that lower left-hand picture, there's Clark Gable besides one of the actual B-17s named Delta Rebel. and it was discussed that that would be used. And then there was another B-17, the 8th Air Force, called Rebel's Revenge. So that was discussed as possible names for this aircraft. However, none of that happened. So those ideals were lost and forgotten. So how did we come to where we did? Well, so say again?
Next slide.
Oh, now next slide. So how did we come to where we are? Well, headquarters personnel contacted General LeMay, hence retired, and asked him what he thought. And he advised us that there was 2 units in the 8th Air Force that were decimated. One was the Bloody 100, the other was the 305th Bombardment Group Heavy. And that happens to be the one that LeMay was command of. So he would like to see us paint the airplane in a 305 airplane in colors and paint scheme. That's what you're seeing there in the green, kind of really double ugly paint job with the triangle G. And that was flown that way for quite a while. And we were getting into the question was sooner or later we're going to have to put a name on this aircraft. In that upper right-hand corner, you see the airplane without its name, and there was still a lot of discussion going on. The airplane at that time was still assigned to the headquarters and was basically flown by 2 members of the yet-to-be established Gulf Coast Wing, Van Skiles and Eddie Burke. And then in 1971, the headquarters CAF decided to expand the CAF to other areas, call them satellite wings or whatever, units. And that was going to be Minnesota, Dallas-Fort Worth, and the Gulf Coast Wing out of Houston-Galveston. And that's the group that Van and Eddie came from. Now, still didn't have a name, and these guys were still flying the airplane, and finally it was decided that Eddie Burke came up with, let's name it Texas Raiders in honor of all the Texas veterans that fought in World War II. The name has stuck. That's where it came from. And then, as I said previously, the paint job did not enhance the aircraft very well. So it was decided to repaint it and make the airplane a little bit more attractive and colorful for air shows. Members of the Gulf Coast Wing, mainly Eddie and Van, spent quite a bit of time going through photos from World War II, 8th Air Force especially, and found that the 381st Bomb Group had the most colorful markings of any unit in the country at the time. So it was decided to paint the aircraft in the 381st Bomb Group, which again was a triangle on the tail with a big L in it. So that was 381st Bomb Group, and that's how we came to that paint job. Next slide. Now, as you can see, the airplane had a really neat display of making an approach and touchdown with one wheel down and flying on through. And that was pretty exciting stuff, and it was well received at the air shows. Later on, I think, Kevin, you're going to kind of describe how that changed a little bit, if I'm not mistaken.
It's not in the presentation, but I can cover it any time. Tell you what, somebody in the audience asked me that question. We'll take that at the Q&A session later on.
Okay, we'll handle that later. So B-17 still belonged to headquarters, was not assigned to the Gulf Coast Wing, but what did happen during 1972 was the CAF was invited to attend something called the Transportation Exposition, which was celebrating the opening of John Foster Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C. So Texas Raiders led a big contingent of CAF aircraft around Washington, up and down the Potomac for almost a week. And of course, with Van and Eddie at the flight controls for the most part. And as a result of that particular event, it kind of became part of the Gulf Coast Wings, decided to go down and help prep these airplanes prior to transpo. And while there, a couple of the members decided that, hey, look at these old Japanese aircraft that had been, well, Japanese replica aircraft from the movie Tora 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 that had been donated, and decided that maybe an airshow act could be made out of that. So those airplanes were then assigned to the Gulf Coast Wing. And if I remember right, there was 6 of them assigned to the Gulf Coast Wing. And so they were moved to Angleton, Texas, refurbished, and made ready for the first air show that they ever participated in at Galveston in 1972. That was June of 72. Because of the fact that B-17s did arrive during the attack, it was also said, hey, you know, we could include this. So Texas Raiders was now included in the Tora Tora Act, and it still participates whenever Tora and the B-17 are in the same location at the same time doing air shows. And as a side note, as we mentioned earlier in the previous webinar, Tora 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 is the longest continuous running civilian air show act. And 2020 will be its 50th year.
And it's a lot of fun to fly too.
Yes, it is. I have to say, and I've had the privilege of flying all the Tora birds we have and the B-17 as well in this. So it's been a great deal for me. All righty. Next slide. Yes.
All right.
Evan.
Yep. Texas Raiders has a rich history with her nose art. Long evolutionary development here. You'll see at the top left in 1974 when the plane was named for the first time. We had a very rudimentary and very simple nose art that went on there, and that is the only nose art that ever appeared on the LeMay paint job. 1977, when the 381st Bomb Group colors went on the plane, which still exist on the plane today, it's basically unchanged. We had to come up with new nose art, so we got a little more fancy with it, as you can see. In 1980, we started to do some modifications on the plane to start bringing it back to the look and feel of a B-17, and that started with the cheek gun windows, which you see in the photo. Those are new as opposed to on the left. Well, when we did that, we obliterated the old nose art, so we had to repaint something. So we got a little creative, came up with a big flag. Later that fall, we added the 2 windows on either side of the cheek gun windows. And once again, we obliterated the nose art. We seem to be really good at that. So we had to get creative and come up with new paint. For about a year and a half, near as can be determined, we had different artwork on the 2 sides of the aircraft. There's very little photographic evidence that I've been able to locate on my own. So if you're watching this and you have good photography from 1980, 81, or 82, please find a way of getting that to me. These 3 pictures for 80 and 82 are really the best I've got, and they're really not that great. 1982, you'll see a landmark here. This is the first time we had the bomb girl show up on the side of the aircraft, and I would really like to have a better resolution photo of that, but that's all I got. 1983 to 1986, we took the plane down, and we'll talk about this a little later, but we fully restored it to a B-17G configuration, which naturally involved a complete paint job. Naturally, brand new nose art. This is Otto Dickey's rendition. He used airbrush technique to put this on there. That lasted all the way till 1994 when we had to repaint the aircraft once again. And we put in Jackie Newsom, and she did a paintbrush version, which was much more authentic from a World War II standpoint. That artwork stayed on the plane for 23 years, longer than all other artwork combined. So that one worked very well. It's very classic. Just 3 years ago, we repainted the airplane for the most recent time, and what you see on there is Gary Velasco's very good work, and it looks fantastic. And if you see the airplane at a show today, this is what you'll see on the airplane. Next slide.
I'll take it this time. The restoration he's talking about occurred between 1983 and 1986. Part of it had to do with maintenance issues, but once we got into the maintenance issues, we decided it was a good time to go ahead and completely restore the aircraft back to its original configuration. And there were thousands of man hours in that. It was everything had to be rebuilt from scratch. So the airplane was rebuilt nose to tail. Two things that we did that was done by professionals was the airplane was 100% rewired with all new wiring everywhere, including mag switch, everything was all new. And the other thing that was done professionally was the Navy had primed this airplane with red lead. And we did not have the capability of removing that with volunteers. That was kind of a special deal. So that had to be purchased or be contracted out. Other than that, it was all done with volunteer work. Turned back to full military configuration, and kind of the leader of that group, that was kind of a group led by two people, Pat Elliott, which we refer to as Colonel Cool, and Dillon, who was in fact a World War II B-17 pilot. After it was returned to service in 1986, the aircraft looked great and was determined by Air Classics magazine to be the best restored B-17 currently flying in the world. Next slide. Back to you, Kevin.
All right, the aircraft flew fantastically for the next 15 years and toured all over the place. But in 2001, the FAA came down with an Airworthiness Directive to all US-based B-17s. And this required all the operators to take the aircraft down and do a fairly intensive inspection for corrosion. So we dutifully did that at the end of the season, and what we found wasn't pleasant. We could fix all the problems that we did find. There wasn't all that. It wasn't all that unfixable, but there was one problem. In the upper left photo, you see wing spar connectors, and these things were very difficult to manufacture, and the corrosion that was on them was unfixable. It took 2.5 years to get these parts made. After we did that, and as you can see in the second photo, the airplane's in multiple pieces outside. So the airplane is not being cared well for in that part. So it took 4.5 years to get the airplane rebuilt, get all the corrosion abated, and make her flyable again. On the bottom, the last photo, that is the first flight of the airplane in October of 2009, almost 8 years after it went down. This was a phenomenally intense restoration project, nearly bankrupted the Gulf Coast wing, but we did persevere. And probably the best thing to come out of this was that we immediately put her into a hangar. And about the only other thing that's important to note here is that one of the cost-cutting measures that we had to do was we had to forego a brand new paint job, which it probably needed at the time, but we just did touch-up paint to get through. We needed to get back up and flying so that we could recoup the coffers. Next slide. Okay, so the next 8 years were fantastic. We got ourselves back on solid financial footing, which was very important, and this was due in no small part to the advent of the Living History Flight Experience Program, which the FAA had allowed starting in 2001. This is a very important revenue stream for just about all warbirds, and critically the big 4-engine kind like the B-17. Quite literally, without living history flights, we wouldn't be able to keep this aircraft flying, just point blank. So it's great that the FAA allows us to do that. We qualify again for that once a year, and we have had an unbroken record of doing so. By the end of the 2016 season, that decision to forego a paint job in 2009 was really showing through. We were getting concerned about surface corrosion. So at the end of that season, we stripped her down to bare metal, you see on the bottom left-hand side. And we gave her a brand new paint job. And of course, had to change the artwork again. And we talked about Gary Velasco. There's a picture of him right there, fantastic artist. And the plane came out and she looks fantastic, look factory fresh. Next slide.
Okay, this comes back to me and some of the experiences I have had with this airplane over the years. The airplane originally didn't do much except to attend a few air shows per year. Later, it was determined that it could be very useful in touring the country and allowing people to see it. And that was picked up, and we started doing that in the 90s until the airplane had to go down again. In that time, we've had quite a few really exciting trips and things done with this airplane. Just unbelievable experiences sometimes. Right after she came out of restoration in 2010, one of the first events she attended was the Thunder over Michigan gathering of B-17s. There were 8 flying fortresses assembled for that mission, and that was quite an experience. Later, at some point, she also had a trip to, took almost 2 months to take it to Alaska and tour it up in that area. Kind of neat. And for me, one of the most spectacular events was in 2015. We flew it over Washington, D.C. in the Arsenal of Democracy. So this airplane has participated in events from coast to coast, border to border, and every once in a while it goes into Canada and even into Mexico. But it is, just hang around if you want to. You're going to see it come to your territory sooner or later. So come see us when you do. Okay, next slide. Now, what would we be doing in front of an airplane like this? Some of our crew members standing there with some Air Force guys. We have always worked on expanding our horizons, or trying to expand our horizons. And one of the things that we've worked out, and actually one of our top members of the unit, Nancy Keeshan, had a big part of this, was coordinating with the U.S. Air Force Wings of Blue drop team, the parachute team. After much discussion and working it out and everything, we were able to come up with a game plan that we were able to drop these people out of the B-17. Much to their delight and to our delight, it has been really a good deal. And at this point, I think we're going to run a little short.
Hit play.
Yeah. And let's see how that looks. And all you'll see is smiley faces.
Oh, that's chopping the video a little bit. I wonder how that happened.
It's going a little too fast.
It is a little bit. Looked a lot better than this in our dry run.
Those guys had
That was fun.
a lot of fun to do. It took a lot of extra work for us on our end to get the bomb bay ready to handle that and strap everybody down correctly and all that, but it really did pay dividends, and I think the Air Force loves it as well as we do.
I tell you, this was one of the few times when the crowd was, I don't think the crowd could have been as pleased as all the people who were in the airplane. There were ear-to-ear smiles on both crews. The Air Force was just as happy as we were, and we just can't wait to do it again.
So do it again.
That's it.
Okay, so that's just one of our really great events that we've been able to participate in, and looking forward to a whole lot more of them. And
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide for just a minute here.
You got to do the right arrow.
Yeah, I need to actually, yeah, there we go. Notice all these gentlemen. One of our big deals is reconnecting World War II vets with this aircraft. That's probably, I would say, primary goal number one. Yes, we have a lot of fun. Yes, we love the airplane, but we love these guys. They fought the big fight, and they're the ones, whenever they come up to the airplane and they start talking to us and telling us their stories, you become totally mesmerized and totally appreciative of their efforts. It's all about the people. The people make it worth what we do. And hopefully we'll continue to do it for many years to come. Back to you, Kevin.
All right, next slide, please. We have some personal stories from veterans that we meet. First of all, we meet a bunch of Rosie the Riveters on the tour, and Peggy Powell is one of those. We've even met two Rosies that we are convinced, based on their stories and on the information that we have, that they actually helped build Texas Raiders back at the Douglas plant. Moving on to Pilot Ray Rowe here on the right-hand side, that was a photo that John Elliott managed to snap at exactly the right time. This was not posed at all. This guy rolled up in his wheelchair, got up to the aircraft, and spontaneously did this. Then we got the story. Ray apparently was a B-17 command pilot in the 8th Air Force, and on his 17th mission, he had 3 engines shot out of the aircraft. But even so, that B-17 held together and got him over safe territory and got his entire crew out of the plane before it burned up. So he credits the aircraft with saving his life. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, this gentleman, William Cheek, was an honor flight returnee at Sun and Fun Air Show. And he came up to the aircraft, and it turned out that 71 years ago to the day, he had a very unusual ME-109 approach him from behind, and this ME-109 was out of ammunition, but was intent on ramming the B-17. And I won't go into how we all know that, but it's unquestionable. He managed to shoot it down, save himself as well as his entire crew. The next gentleman, Harold Dillon. Every once in a while, you have somebody walk up and your jaw just drops. Well, the hat that he's wearing is what did it for me. This guy was stationed on a radar picket destroyer off of Okinawa in April 1945. Now, radar picket destroyer's job is to protect the fleet from kamikazes. The problem with that is that the destroyers themselves are wide open to attack by those same kamikazes, which the kamikazes did. The DB-724 Laffey is known as the ship that would not die. And if you want to go look that up, please do. It's an amazing story. As a tiny little destroyer, a tin can, it survived direct hits from 4 bombs and 6 kamikazes. Harold Dillon was one of those survivors. And one of the reasons that's important is because the failure of the radar picket destroyer model is what led to the PB-1W development, and thus the fact that we have Texas Raiders with us today. Finally, Urban Rajoy there on the right. This guy is 96 years old, and he acts like a 65-year-old. We met him at Arsenal of Democracy in 2015. Turns out that guy was a then current bush pilot in Alaska. He loaded and unloaded his own fuel barrels into his own aircraft, delivered them to customers out in the bush. Just incredible. But in 1944, as a B-17 pilot, his nickname in the squadron was Pops, because he was by far the oldest man in the squadron at 25 years old. Next slide. Every once in a while we have a really heartening day, and this one was fantastic on the Florida tarmac. We've all heard of Tuskegee Airmen and their exploits. Well, they're true. So this gentleman here, George Hardy, and the other one, William Brake, met in the skies over Italy and Germany numerous times. George Hardy escorted Colonel Brake and the rest of his unit numerous times, but they had never met before, not until this day. And we brought them together, and we gave them both a ride on Texas Raiders, and you couldn't have seen bigger smiles on either one of them. It was truly a fantastic day. Next slide. And finally, we're proud to have 2 B-17 combat veterans in our own wing as members. On the left there, you got Teddy Kirkpatrick, who flew 37 missions and completed his tour of duty in September of 1944. And on the right, we have George Waters. He was the ball turret gunner. He was shot down after, on his 11th mission, he was shot down in February 1944. And afterwards, he was a POW until the end of the war. And he's actually written a book about his experiences, which are very interesting, to say the least. Next slide. Finally, it takes a village to keep Texas Raiders flying, and this is our family. You'll see about 50 people in this photo. Only about 8 of them are actual pilots for Texas Raiders, but everything else, it takes skills and efforts from all walks of life to keep this plane flying and going and doing all the things that it does. It takes maintenance, supply chain, accounting, retail sales, operations, marketing. I mean, I can sit here and list these forever, but that's what it takes. So whatever your real world skills are, we are almost certain to need them. And we're always short on volunteers. So if you'd like to make a difference, and you don't mind getting your hands dirty, you'd like to come down, get in touch with us. Go to our website, B17TexasRaiders.org, and come on down, be a part of it. We'd love to have you. And that's our presentation. So I think now we just go over to questions and answers and see what we've got from the audience.
I cannot believe that after the practice that we had of 2 hours long on Monday, you guys got that down to a 40-minute presentation. So I know our audience is going to have questions about the Gulf Coast Wing, about Texas Raiders. So let's find out a little bit more about Texas Raider. And would you weigh in here, Leah, with some questions that have come in from our audience?
Yes, we do have a lot of questions today. So I've already warned the audience that if we don't get to all of the questions, we will accept them in the question feature, or you can shoot us an email and we will get it along to the panelists and get an answer for you. One of the questions we have today is, how did Texas Raiders get FAA approval to serve as a parachute platform? So how was Texas Raiders able to do that?
That's accomplished through a waiver program that we dealt with, and you also have to have a letter of authorization that you can perform this duty safely. And it's really a simple process. Does that answer the question okay, or do we need to explain how all that's done and how you petition?
You can answer that question in 30 seconds or an hour and 30 seconds. So.
Well, that's probably true of all the questions.
Let's just say we have to create a letter. We have to create a procedures and get them approved with a letter of authorization from the FAA, and we'll keep it short like that.
You make that sound really easy, buddy.
Hey, pardon?
You make that sound really easy.
You get it right.
The next question is, where is Texas Raiders located?
Conroe, Texas, which is on the north side of Houston.
And one question we had is the Gulf Coast Wing training younger pilots for Texas Raiders or younger maintenance people?
Absolutely.
And yeah, the short answer is yes. The long answer is a little bit more complicated than that. My recommendation is you get in touch with us through our website, and we will walk you through a process of how you eventually become a pilot.
And Buddy, in case you didn't know, Buddy also serves as the CAF's chief check pilot. So, Buddy, do you want to explain maybe to people what it takes to become a B-17 pilot in, let's say, 2 minutes?
Give me 2 minutes, huh? Hopefully you'll come to us with the experience as a tail dragger pilot with a multi-engine rating, an instrument rating, and of course you got to be a member of the CAF. That's minimum. And tail dragger experience is highly qualified. If you got multi-engine tail dragger like in a DC-3 or C-47 Twin Beach, that's particularly helpful. You start out with spending time as a co-pilot. You must spend it. Once you get checked out as a co-pilot, then it takes about 25 hours of flying with the airplane, additional training stuff, before you're allowed to train to go to the left seat of this aircraft. Once you become a primary pilot, then you're there. And that's the thing is, you have to be kind of patient with that because it's an terribly expensive procedures and takes a lot of time, a lot of money. And if you woke up expecting to do it in one day, it's probably going to be very disappointing. But if you plan on spending at least maybe 2 years getting there, you'll be there. And it's very rewarding to be able to do this. Is that short enough?
That's good.
I think that was good. And anything that we mention here on the webinar, like websites and email addresses and things like that, we'll make sure to compile all that information and send it to everybody afterward, so that it's easy to access. A question from our UK wing leader is that, as we know, the B-24 Diamond Lil has visited Europe. I wonder if any CAF B-17 has ever made the trip across the pond to Europe, either Texas Raiders or Sentimental Journey.
At this time, neither one of our aircraft has been there. However, there is discussions going on to accomplish this in the very near future, I might add.
So the short answer is not yet.
Yeah, that's the short answer, but
That's always the answer. Just because we haven't done it, we never drop people out of our Bombay either.
exactly, it's in the discussion stage, and I feel like we will probably accomplish it.
Well, that's very exciting. One question is, the original B-17 was not pressurized. Is Texas Raiders pressurized?
Ooh,
Never has been, never will be.
nope. So you want to plug all the holes, you bring a lot of stopgap. That's not going to happen.
Okay, so now we have some questions about restoration. The cheek turret on the right side, was it installed on B-17s during World War II? Who fired the guns?
Yes, it was there, and predominantly it was the navigator that fired the cheek guns, but depending on the task loading with the navigator and the bombardier, they could both fire them. The bombardier was in charge primarily with the chin gun, but like I said, depending on what was going on at that particular second, he could also fire either of the cheek guns.
Which pieces of the B-17 were restored, and are they working weapons?
None of the guns are functional. They are an amalgam, basically. The barrels and the triggers and the handles are all authentic M2 machine guns. The receivers, which is where the bullet goes into the chamber, those are machined aluminum that were manufactured by some of our members during the 83 to 86 restoration. So you couldn't make these things fire no matter how hard you try, but they look authentic.
And not allowed to.
Yeah, the FAA frowns on that. So.
Well, that makes sense.
Also to build upon that, the ball turret is operational if we decide to use it. It just takes a few things to get it up and running again.
Yes, repairs on that.
Chin turret is under registration to be restored, so it can be used. Top turret is still right now. Do what?
The chin turret, Laser says the chin turret is basically ready. There's just a couple of things you need to do to it, and then he just needs maintenance time to put it in the aircraft. Top turret is operational on a stand. We're not going to put that in the aircraft. It takes too much room in the flight deck. Our living history flight experiences would not work out so well. There's just not enough room to have a turret and a couple of people up there enjoying the view behind the pilots. So we made a decision long ago, let's give people a look. So our top turret is operational. It's on a stand, and it's at headquarters. Well, our headquarters in Gulf Coast Wing in Conroe. So if you want to see that thing operational, you come to the hangar.
This question is, do you have working Brownings on Raiders, or are they gas operated or inert replicas?
Inert replicas.
Okay. Does Texas Raiders give rides, and if so, how much do they cost?
Yes, we do. That's the living history flight experience. And we have 3 levels of seats. We have 6 seats in the fuselage where you can sit in the waist or the radio room, and those seats are $475 each. There's the navigator seat, which is $750. And then there's the bombardier seat up in the very front nose, and that one's $800.
Navigator seat up in the nose as well.
Yes, the navigator and the bombardier are both in the nose, one right after the other.
Was the ball turret retractable in case of a crash landing? And how did the gunner escape?
Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you for asking that one. B-24s did have a retractable ball turret, and the ball turret was identical to the B-17. They were absolutely interchangeable. The only difference is that retraction mechanism. The reason the B-24s retract is because it was a nose wheel aircraft, and if they went tail dragger heavy for some reason, it would crush the ball. The B-17 is a tail dragger aircraft, so that would never happen. So they saved the weight of the retracting mechanism, and the B-17's ball turret never retracted. The ball turret gunner was never in position for takeoff or landing. In fact, we've had ball turret gunners tell us that that was a court-martial offense if they tried to. So they definitely didn't go. They didn't stay in that ball turret for that position.
Have you guys ever tried to do a bomb run with dummy practice bombs? And next question, do you have a Norden bomb sight?
Okay. Yes to the Norden bomb site, and yes to the bombing missions. At an air show in Geneseo, New York, we had a bombing competition with 4 other B-17s to drop watermelons. And it was quite effective.
I
wish I could have been there for that. I don't think that was anymore.
Anyone has footage or photos of that, I'm sure that there are interested parties.
Oh, yeah, no kidding.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. I think a good one. As a pilot, can you say a few words about the B-17 performance parameters? For instance, the climb rate or the max takeoff mass with all the engines operating, fuel consumption and things like that. I think people are kind of looking for a comparison between, you know, a World War II B-17 and perhaps an aircraft today.
Okay, performance-wise, B-17 normally its maximum takeoff weight during wartime was 65,000 pounds. We operate pretty close to about 52,000 when we're maxed out. The airplane safely climbs at about 500 feet per minute, and that helps with the not popping the ears and stuff like it would be in a jet. It's not particularly fast. The airplane is a very stable machine, and once it's airborne, it takes a lot of effort to get it to change from whatever it's doing to the next event, like turning, things like that. But as far as performance, we flight plan the airplane at approximately 160 knots over the ground, and maximum altitude we fly this aircraft is about 10,500 feet. During the war with the turbo superchargers and everything, they were quite capable of well over 30,000. So as far as performance, here's a point of ponder. When the aircraft first built in 1937, the original airplane, they could climb higher and go faster than any fighter at the time. So that was kind of a neat deal. And now, by the time the war rolled around, fighters had more than caught up with the capability of this aircraft. Is that enough of the answer, or do I need to send out a manual on it?
I think that's good. If not, just continue to send questions. The next question is, what does it cost these days to fully fuel Texas Raiders for an air show?
If you fill the tanks, it's about $10,000. Avgas costs about $2.50 more than pump gas is a good rule of thumb, and it's 1,700 gallons for a full tank.
So someone might be able to do the math quickly. What does it cost to operate Texas Raiders for a season?
For a season?
Man, I don't know if I even know that one. I can tell you per hour.
Well, I think, you know, the airplane normally generates, I would say, probably $250 million, probably what it generates, but it consumes about $150 to almost $200,000 for operational costs. The airplane is not cheap to operate. And the manpower involved, as far as our volunteers, I would venture that that airplane takes, what, 5,000 work hours per year, just keeping it
Something
going.
like that. Yeah, the numbers that I've been given, it takes about 30 man hours per flight hour to keep it flying. The costs per flight hour, you're looking at $3,500 per in variable, plus we've got a fixed number that is a lot higher than you think it is. The maintenance and the insurance, and there's a lot of other, and there's numerous other costs that whether we fly or not. And this year is a great example of why those fixed costs are so important, is because we're not getting any revenue this year, and yet we still got to pay all those bills. If we don't get it out and fly it, it's going to be really hard to pay them, and we're running behind on some of that. So this year's a very lean year. Last year we did very well. It's I don't want to go into exact dollar figures, but a good year. We bring in a lot more money to what Buddy was talking about, but our operational costs eat up just about all of it. If it wasn't for our volunteer labor, which costs exactly zero, Buddy and I get paid the same amount when we're on the plane, so which is zero. And without that, we definitely would be no chance of ever flying this aircraft. So when you do come out and see the plane, and you see them on the tarmac for 12 hours on a 100-degree day, when you shake your head and wonder why they're doing it, just understand that they're not doing it for money, they're doing it for the love of the aircraft. And we do. We love every minute of it.
So that goes back to the old joke. How do you make $1 million in the warbird business? You start with 2 million.
Yeah, that's a fact. That is a fact. They're very expensive to operate.
So one question is, how many times has Texas Raiders had to perform a go-around while landing? I was on board a couple of years ago when the pilots had to perform one. It was a really neat experience. So first, what's a go-around while landing? And then second, how many times have you had to do that?
Well, speaking for this one pilot, I can tell you that a go-around is you're set up for landing, you got the landing gear down, you got the flaps down, you're approaching the runway, and possibly the tower will tell you to go around because there's a runway incursion by someone on the ground, or some event has occurred that you have to proceed on and continue to fly and not land. When you do that, that's a pretty exciting event for the guys up front, because you're set up with the mindset of one thing, and then when it changes abruptly, hopefully you have briefed it and are ready for it, and it still becomes a lot of activity in that airplane in a short time. Now, having said that, how many times have I done it? In all the years I've been flying it, probably 4 times total.
How long have you been flying Texas Raiders, Buddy?
Since 1986. A long time in a Galaxy 4 way.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Lincoln was in office.
So, I mean, you have flown a B-17 longer than most people first trained in a B-17 by a long shot. I think you're probably in the person to answer these questions would be you at this point. Yeah. So one question is the B-17 flyable with 2 engines in operative on one side?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This airplane is probably one of the, if not the safest airplanes you can fly. It's, in fact, as Kevin alluded to earlier, one gentleman was able to get his aircraft back with just 1 engine operating. And these airplanes have so much redundancy in the airframe, the way they're built. They're built heck for stout. They are strong airplanes. And as far as each one of these engines, I would say they're real reliable. I mean, they are old, but they are reliable. They're well maintained, and we've got a maintenance crew that is second to none. Those guys are just phenomenal in taking care of this thing and babying this airplane. And I mean, don't walk by and rub your finger on it if you don't want somebody talking ugly to you. But they take care of the airplane big time. And as far as 2 engines out, it's a procedural thing, but the airplane is just fine. You have to know your limitations and make sure you stay within the aircrafts and your limitations when such an event occurs. And we do train that during training of pilots and during our annual check rides.
I'd like to add, if you don't mind, I'd like to add on to that. World War II, this was one of the most safest aircraft that you could take into combat, and that was because Boeing built the aircraft very specifically to take a tremendous amount of combat damage and still bring the crews home. It's why there's no hydraulically boosted controls. That's why it's such a bear to fly. It's like flying a Mack truck, and everybody will nod his head for that. But you can.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Oh yeah, nobody's gonna pass that up. It's got 4 engines on it. You lose 1 engine, you got 3. It's gonna fly anywhere. The people taking it on bomb runs, they continued their bomb runs with just 3 engines. It doesn't care if it loses an engine. If it loses 2 engines, it'll take you anywhere you want to go. On 1 engine, it will take either a controlled landing, or it'll, as Ray Rowe showed us, it'll take you to a safe spot so you can get out. And it was one of the few aircraft that was that safe.
When you get when you get to that point, if you were down to 1 engine, there's a lot that you can do, and that's what the crews did do during the war. Is they jettisoned the ball turret, they threw out all the heavy machine guns, all the ammunition, jettisoned all the bombs, anything that added weight to the airplane. Once they reduced all the weight, then the airplane could sustain itself even longer than what you would normally think it could. Get rid of weight, and the airplane will fly.
What's the wartime bomb payload compared to B-29s or Lancasters?
Okay, less. How's that? A typical bomb load on a B-17 World War II is 5,000 to 6,000 pounds. The all-out theoretical maximum was 18,000, but there's no record of any B-17 ever taking off with 18,000 pounds of bombs. That also involved wing racks, which is very few documented cases of wing racks being used. So 5,000 to 6,000 typically. Lancaster had a lot less weight to carry. They had fewer gunners, fewer defensive weapons. It was a different platform designed for a different approach to bombing. They went at night, and that allowed them to do different things. And they converted that into bomb loads. So a Lancaster could carry, and I don't know the exact numbers on that. I think it was almost double into a typical bomb load. The B-29s, I believe they were carrying at least 10,000 pounds on a typical mission to Japan. That was a very long mission for them. So B-29s could carry quite a lot. I think their all maximum was about 20,000. I am the wrong person to ask for that. B-29s are also not my expertise area.
Well, so there's a little bit of a competition, it sounds like.
It's an earlier aircraft. Later aircraft are all going to do better than that. The B-52 can carry a bomb load that's almost the weight of a B-17. So.
Wow. The question came up and I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this question, but are there things that are common issues with B-17s, things that need to be fixed quite a bit? This is referencing to a crack in the main spar. Are there other things like that that come up quite a bit that the maintenance crew has to deal with?
Okay, the main spars on these aircraft are more like bridge structures than I-beams. They're quite robust, and all the B-17s had to go through the inspection and repair of the wing spars, attach points, when these airplanes were being used by the fire bombers over forest fires. And after so many pulling so many G's so many times, one of the wings failed on one of these aircraft, and that prompted a investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, and they recommended, and the FAA followed suit, that all B-17s will be inspected, and it is a recurrent inspection for damage in those areas. And the ideal is B-17s, B-24s, B-29s, all those airplanes were basically designed to fly high altitude, straight and level, and drop bombs. That was their design. The way they're used, like in air shows and especially firefighting, the way they were used that way, they were really stressed hard and worked hard. And so failure was probably going to happen at some point. And but now we're on a program to make sure there's no failures in that area.
I'd like to point out that Texas Raiders was never a firebomber.
True. Sentimental Journey was.
Okay, one question is, which B-17 flew on the 4th of July salute to America this year?
Where was that?
Washington, D.C.
You see,
No B-17 flew in that one. To the best of my knowledge. There's only four left flying right now.
Only 4 in the U.S. So it wasn't TR. So it had to be either Yankee Lady, aluminum overcast, or.
I don't think we B-17 participated in that particular event.
It's pretty far away from Arizona. I don't think they got that far yet.
Okay.
So,
will Texas Raiders be flying in the 2020 Arsenal of Democracy flyover in Washington, D.C., September 25th?
Buddy, you want to take that one?
If I have my say, yes, it will. There's some discussion going on about all that. Of course, the COVID-19 situation has got some issues involved, but I know there's a lot of discussion. And there's two sides to it. And all I can say is I would like to see it happen. But right now, that discussion is left up to the management of the Gulf Coast wing.
If it's a vote, yeah, we're going. Unfortunately, it's not a vote. There's things going on that probably outside of the purview of this discussion that are going to decide whether it happens or not. We will hopefully know soon as to whether that's gonna happen, but we are very much looking forward to somehow making this happen. How's that?
Okay, let me make a correction here. Thinking back on this, Yankee Lady did fly over. It was Yankee Lady. She did.
So Yankee Lady was in 4th of July, and stay tuned for Arsenal of Democracy. At last count, I can say there's over 70 aircraft that are participating in Arsenal of Democracy. So it will be amongst friends. Here is a question. What is the farthest Texas Raiders has ever flown?
Probably Anchorage. No, Fairbanks. It was in Fairbanks in '97. Fairbanks, Alaska. How's that?
Yep, that would work.
Has the Gulf Coast wing halted writing experiences since COVID?
No.
No, we're still having. There's not a lot of them, but no, we're doing them where we can. Check our website for the next available rides day.
All right. Are there any famous CAF Kernels who have flown on Texas Raiders?
Oh, yes.
That's a long list, actually.
Paul Tibbetts. Paul Tibbetts Jr. and Paul Tibbetts III or IV. Let me think who else we've had on board flying this thing.
Ira C. Eaker has actually flown her.
Who?
General Ira C. Eaker.
Yep.
And if you don't know who he is, he's the general that made the decision in 1943 that all B-17s would go to Europe and Pacific wouldn't get any more. He's the guy.
And, I'm sure that I can remember a few more, but if I had time to think about it, but we have had some pretty good folks with history on board. But Paul Tibbetts is the one I remember the most, and Carter McGregor. I know most of you never even heard that name, but he was
Hellcat pilot.
Do what?
He was the Hellcat pilot, right?
No. He was B-29 pilot. He had a lot to do with bringing Fifi back into the fold, and really a great individual, excellent pilot, and got to watch and fly with him before. So we've had a number of cool people.
In the Gulf Coast Wing in the 70s, we had 2 members of the Black Sheep Squadron in the wing. We also had 4 or 5 NASA astronauts, although these guys were usually involved with the Tora aircraft. If you remember Apollo 13, the movie, Fred Hayes was actually involved with the initial Tora setup.
Cool. And I'll put it out there that we oftentimes get people submitting photos, old photos, and photos of famous people around the aircraft through the Facebook page. So that's a way that we usually kind of gather historic information. So we'll make sure that Facebook page is on the email that goes out, because I see names that look familiar to me, and saw some comments that people are seeing their parents in some of the older historic pictures of Texas Raiders. So if anyone has those, we'd love to get a copy.
Yes, we would.
You're right. I got a question that someone understands the rudder is not very effective at lower speed. If there's an engine loss?
That's incorrect. The rudder is the most effective flight control we have on that aircraft. In fact, it's probably most all the Boeing products, whether you're talking about a 747 or whatever Boeing aircraft, are just about all heavy-duty rudder-operated airplanes. But B-17 definitely flies really well if you know how to use the rudder. And I will tell you that it is a very effective flight control.
Have you ever flown at high altitudes that needed heated flight or blue bunny suits? And does Texas Raiders have a working oxygen system?
No. So we acquired the aircraft in 1967, and she had both an oxygen system and the working turbos at that time. And in 1971, we took the turbos out. Turbos on a aircraft are not much different than turbos on a car. And by that, I mean they're very expensive. They're the first things to break, and they're very expensive to fix. And the way we operate the aircraft, we don't need to fly at high altitude. So we took those very expensive monsters out of the loop. At about the same time, we also took the oxygen system out. The blue bunny suits that you allude to, those are the heated under plug-in models that World War II era B-17 crewmen all wore. And no, none of us have those, although a couple of people, I do believe, have them as heirlooms. You can get them on eBay every once in a while. But no, you definitely don't want to wear those or use them.
Can you describe the difference between fuel used in World War II and today's avgas? What kind of modifications were necessary to use today's fuel?
Not much of anything. World War II avgas was rated 100, 130. And today it's low lead, 100. The difference between 100, 130 and just 100 low lead is nothing. The 100 with the rate today is the lean rating. The 130 rating from World War II is a rich rating, and we dropped that in today's world. We did take a lot of the lead out from World War II. We don't use that now. We use aromatics like xylene and benzene and toluene to increase the octane, but that's something that we do with pump gas as well. If you have unleaded fuel in your car, which everybody does now, it's all the same stuff. You were going to answer there. I apologize if I cut you off. Is there something we've done to the engine to make them work better with a low lead?
No, they don't require any modifications to the engines. Carburetors now have a different type of diaphragms in them so that they can handle that different product, but for the most part, the airplane is not modified in any way. We are kind of limited on amount of power we are allowed to, maximum power we can put on it to prevent detonation. But other than that, there's no real differences.
One thing to add here is in the 80s, we figured out a way to make automotive engines run on unleaded gasoline, and that has never been engineeringly possible to do with an aircraft engine. And it has to do with the changing heat.
Yeah, there's these aircraft engines. Well, if they can find some way to do that, that'll be great. But due to the lubrication of the valves and all the things like that that's internal that require and depend on lead, we're gonna have to use it for a long time.
There's just a lot less in it than there used to be.
Correct.
All right, I really like this question. Were there any provisions on board to destroy secret equipment in case of aircraft loss, such as the Norden bomb site? Did the B-17 have a self-destruct button?
Well, not
I love
that. Yeah, it wasn't Star Trek. It was pretty rudimentary. The navigator was trained that the destruction of the Norden bomb site was his first priority, and escaping on foot was his second. And his self-destruct button, so to speak, was a 45 through the head of the Norden bomb site. That's it. That's all he had.
Do you know of any F models that still fly? There was a rumor one is flying in New York City.
There is one F model that is airworthy, and that is Memphis Belle at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Museum. That one could fly anytime, and because it's Memphis Belle, it's never going to fly. Too risky.
There's also an F model out at the Museum of Flight in Washington State in Seattle.
Oh yeah, Boeing B. Boeing B went down when the wing spar AD came around. They chose not to do it. So if they did that wing spar AD, they could bring that one up to flyable, but it doesn't meet the definition because they didn't do the AD. Yes, there's plenty of models around. It gets tricky when you start defining what's airworthy.
Was the ball turret able to be manually lifted if it got stuck in flight during the war?
No. There were manual handles that you could turn the thing left and right and up and down so that you could get that hatch to the inside. The ball turret gunner always entered and exited the ball turret from the fuselage in flight. So before landing, you want him out of there. You don't want him in there for that at all. But if the mechanism failed, they brought out the manual handle. They just turned it around, popped the hatch, and brought him up.
Do y'all know how many B-17s are under restoration that might fly in the future?
8.
Tough question.
I just did an article on this. There's 5 that are flying in the world, 4 in the US, 1 in the UK. There are 6 that are airworthy that don't fly, and there are 8 undergoing restoration for the intention of flying. None of these have a completion date on the calendar yet. They're all trying really hard. It's a monumental task to get a B-17 airworthy, and we wish them the best of luck. And we hope to see them in the sky one of these years.
So Jeff Kitterman asks, is this the B-17 that's in the iconic Don't Mess with Texas commercial?
It is not a Sentimental Journey.
Okay.
That commercial came out while the Wing Spar AD was going on, and so Texas Raiders, which would have been perfect for the commercial, wasn't available.
Yeah, and for people outside of Texas, Don't Mess with Texas is a littering campaign that's been around for a very long time. Yeah. And the commercial was a guy in a pickup truck threw trash out his window, and a B-17 comes right up behind him and storms over the car. So it's a great commercial.
It is awesome. Look it up on YouTube. It's fantastic.
It is. And bringing up the B-17 Sentimental Journey, which is another B-17 that is owned and operated by the Commemorative Air Force, we are told that Sentimental Journey does have a top turret in the cockpit. Therefore, Sentimental Journey does not allow passengers in the cockpit for living history flights. So that aircraft does.
Yeah, they do have one, which goes a long way towards authenticity of the aircraft. But as we alluded to before, it gets in the way of the people being able to enjoy the flight deck. It's honestly, it's a trade-off. Yeah, that's the trade-off they chose to make.
Do you know which B-17s were used in the Memphis Belle movie?
I do. I know the Pink Lady, which no longer flies, was in it. Sally B in the UK was in it, and there's at least 2 more. Buddy, do you remember?
No.
I've got that list somewhere.
We had no aircraft involved in that.
Yeah, we didn't. If one of the Gulf Coast Wing members is out there and can go to the site real quick, I've got the list, and it's on the notes section of all the B-17s that I have listed. Obviously, I can't look it up right now, but I know what they are. I just don't have it at my fingertips. I'm sorry.
That's a good point. So people can go to the B-17 Texas Raiders website and read up a little bit more on the history of the aircraft. A lot of work's been done there.
Actually, yes, we just posted about 6 weeks ago, full history of the aircraft and history of the wing. Pretty comprehensive. So if you'd like to know more about it, actually this webinar really scratches the surface. We go into a whole lot more detail.
And then last question, can anyone come out to Tomball to see Texas Raiders for a tour, or do they need an appointment?
Well, they can go to Tomball, but we're not there. We're up in Conroe, a little bit further north. But it's best if you get us a call. Some days we're there and some days we're not. It depends on whether it's a work day, whether it's a fly day. If it's a fly day, yes, absolutely, everybody's welcome. For the other days, we do prefer that you make an appointment. But just get in touch with us. We're very friendly folks, and we'd love to have you.
So I have one more question that I want to ask each of the panelists, which is, why do you love the B-17 Texas Raiders? Buddy,
Dan,
you can
start. You're up.
Okay, well, being as a child of the 50s, I watched all the World War II movies, built plastic models of about every kind of airplane that was in World War II, and the B-17 just always had it's iconic. I mean, it is the #1 airplane, and I mean, throughout the CAF, it's the #1 airplane. Leah, you've had those competitions 2 years in a row, and the airplane beat out Corsairs and P-51s and everything. It is just a fantastic airplane with a fantastic story. Now let's fly it.
Dan, you've got a personal story.
I grew up in World War. Had a brother had a pilot in B-17 in World War II, and as a kid brother, I always idolized him. I knew the B-17 would bring you home. And when I got to the squadron and they had the B-17, the PB-1W, I was like a kid in a candy store. Being a crew member aboard that aircraft is a dream that's hard to describe. It fantastic, brings tears in my eyes.
Well spoken by a fellow sailor.
There you go. I've been a aircraft guy and a history nut pretty much all my life, since I was about 8 years old. The first book I ever read was 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. I never could have imagined that years later I would be touring with one of the guys in that book, and that's Colonel Dick Cole, who toured with us for years. May he rest in peace. But the Corsair was my first love, but I fell in love with all these aircraft. I don't know why a weapon of war is beautiful. It seems contradictory. It really does. But so many of these are. But the history that they represent, the people that sacrifice so much, and you look around and we're just so free to do all these different things, and it's such a rare gift that we have, and it boils down to it really is a gift, one that is recurringly brought around to us, and it's by these people that continually fight for our freedoms. And World War II is an event that has defined the modern world and continues to be. It really is something that deserves a lot of research and honor. And every day, I think that, that I'm able to be a volunteer with the Gulf Coast Wing and the Commemorative Air Force, and give back to the people that gave me my freedoms.
All right, Leah, thanks for all those questions. Our audience, thanks for all those great questions. I'm so glad that you guys got through the PowerPoint as fast as you did, because those questions really brought out a lot of the details that I know you had to cut from the PowerPoint just to get the general story. And so what a great day. What a wonderful story about Texas Raiders and the Gulf Coast Wing. Buddy Cooksey, Dan Reagan, Kevin Michaels, thank you so much. Nancy Queechin for putting this together. Thank you so much. You know, if you love what we're doing, I would encourage you guys to support the CAF. If you don't like these webinars, reach out to me, please, and tell me what you don't like. And if you've got any suggestions on other topics that we can bring up, we'd be really happy to. The next topic we have coming up is actually next week. We've got Ask Brad Pilgrim, since he, like you gentlemen, is such a wealth of knowledge that we just decided we were going to voluntold him to sit in front of the camera and have people throw questions at him. So if you've got some questions, please make sure you register for that and send those in ahead of time. Again, thank you, gentlemen, so much for your support. For the great information you brought to us today. What a wonderful story. And I'm super envious that you get to do this every single day. And one of these days, I'm going to make it down to Conroe and buy one of those rides. Sign me up.
We'd love to have you.
It'd be worth it.
All right. Thank you so much. Wish
Take
you
care.
guys well.
Thank you.